Citibank reports its results on the 19th of January. Even, commercial organizations, they all are now all reporting so quickly. And you need to, because the next quarter is coming. And if we're not careful, we'll soon be on to monthly reporting. And I don't know how many of you have been following the American system where they're saying, actually have a real-time reporting system that anybody can look into the banks, into the organization's books and make their own set of accounts. So that's where we're heading. So the good news is that the accountants are becoming integrated into the business process. The bad news is that we're coming and having to face the consequences of that, i.e., okay, this is what this number is showing. What does it mean? Now, what does it mean? And how will it materialize going forward? And that's where the perception and the management of risk becomes an important part. Because that's where the business managers have in the past been able to take their decision making based on, I think this is going to happen and I'm planning for this and then this is going to happen, and suddenly they become the decision makers. So now for accountants to become decision makers, they need to start understanding risk. They need to understand what does this mean. And that's where I think one of the key points that's coming out of all of this is that risk is about uncertainty, and that's something that the accountants are least comfortable with. So you come along and you say, okay, these guys are changing the rules on us, so why don't we control them? And I think the good thing is that the world is now starting to talk about risk not as subjective thing that someone says this is riskier than the other, or he's taking too much risk. Now what's happening is that the professions, the management, the whole business community is saying, no, but when he's saying it's riskier, what does he mean? How much more risk? Why is it riskier? So the good news for accountants is that risk is now being started to be questioned, it's being started to be quantified, it's starting to be having to be explained, and there we can take control again if we are good accountants. We now know that if someone's going to have to answer the questions, we can answer them as well as anybody else. So the good news is that while our old jobs are going away, I think there's a lot more interesting stuff that is coming. So we need to understand risk, and I'll just quickly try and take you through in 10-15 minutes exactly what is the nature of understanding risk. We're obviously not going to be able to quantify it and go through that, but it's just the process by which you evaluate risk. So risk, unfortunately or fortunately, is everywhere. It's you can see it in the external market, increasing competition, new legislation, and actually political situation and legislation. That's probably becoming one of the biggest risks that businesses face. The regime that you were living in suddenly becomes unacceptable from a political point of view. Whether it's, let's say, cigarettes, business a short while ago, suddenly it's become unfashionable or unpolitical to be in that business. Similarly, things which were luxury to the point of being obnoxious, gas guzzling cars, suddenly everybody frowns on it and says, no, this is not a good thing. So apart from the financial risks that we are all used to, there's a lot more of political or let's say socio risk that is coming through. And that is another phenomenon which I think people need to get to grips with. Internal risks are more things that we are more used to, and I've got them highlighted there, and you can just quickly read them. I won't read them. So what is risk management then all about? It really is trying to balance your risk-reward ratio. I remember when I became an accountant, and even before I became an accountant, you went to business school, and in class 101 business finance, they said risk-reward ratio. This the more risk you take, the more return you want, or vice versa. And then when you became an accountant for almost 20 years, none of the accounting literature, accounting, financial statements, or anything mentioned anything about risk. It was all about, this is the performance, this is what we have done, this is the returns, these are the yields, and so on and so forth. Only now, in the last 5 years or so, are we starting to see that important element of how much risk did we take and how much risks are we taking brought into the domain of the financial sphere. So it's about that. And then on the other side, it's about balancing risks with the cost of controls. You know, it's easy to say you can control everything, but if you start to control everything, the chances are nothing's going to move, you're going to block everything, and there's going to be no action, and then suddenly there'll be no business. So it's balancing your risk and your return, and it's also balancing the cost of control versus the risk that exists in an organization. And all of that is put together, as I was trying to explain, that it's now becoming an enterprise-wide risk management. Now, what does that mean? It means that people do not sit in their own departments, in their own areas, in their own silos, and look at risk. Because some or a lot of this risk, it's like, let's say, someone thinks and says, oh, this thing is very risky, and I'm going to spend a lot of money in trying to control this. And then suddenly you realize that the organization is taking something literally very similar to that in another department and maybe taking 10 times that risk. So the cost of trying to save it here is never going to be worthwhile. So you look at the overall enterprise-wide risk management and to try and set your objectives on that. So really, what is new about risk management? It's becoming explicit. And I think that probably is one of the biggest changes that people need to come to grips with. In the past, it was, like I explained early on, it was easy to say, oh, it's too risky or it's too much risk. Now you're going to have to quantify that. You're going to have to evaluate that. You're going to have, and by you, I don't mean you, I mean your organization, your business managers. And that's where I think there is a whole area where the accounting profession has to get involved. Two, it is going to become structured. I.e., like I said, it's something that you have to think through across in a systematic way. Each person's view of something is, and it's interesting even in an organization who's dealing with risk all the time. It's fascinating sitting with a group of people and you realize that each one pulls in different directions when you ask them, which way is the dollar going to go? And everybody someone saying, oh no, I think it's going to come down, so I've done this. And another person in the same organization might be saying, oh no, but I thought it was going up and I've done this. So here you've got two sets of costs, both negating each other, and the net result is that the organization has lost two sets of costs and it's really got no idea of what it's trying to do. So it is going to be explicit, it's going to be structured, and you have to do it as part of your business processes. When you do that, what are the benefits? Primarily, I think the key thing is trying to understand what the organization that you work in or you work for, what their risk appetite and strategy is. That's really, in a nutshell, is very important, because you've got to not only be clear to yourself, you've got to be explaining that to your constituents, your eventual investors, and all of those people. Because if you have a different mindset on risk and your investors have a different mindset on risk, then you might realize that it's not what the two need to agree and to have the same logic on that. You've got to link and to cover risk through an organized and a response basis. You've got to look at risk management as a way of minimizing surprises. Now, when we say surprises, it could be that things go